The night of the unexpected challenge, the soft golden lights of the auditorium spilled across the stage, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floor. Hundreds of people murmured in hushed excitement, the air thick with anticipation. It was a music charity gala, a night where famous artists and generous donors came together to raise funds for underprivileged children. The tickets had sold out weeks ago, and the guest list included actors, politicians, CEOs, and the most celebrated musicians from around the world. Sundar Pichai stood quietly in the corner of the backstage area, his hands tucked into his pockets, observing everything with his usual calm. He wasn't here as the CEO of Google tonight. He was here as a supporter of the cause, a quiet donor who had been convinced by an old friend to attend. Sundar had no plans to take the spotlight. He preferred to blend into the background, listen to good music, and quietly contribute to the charity's mission. But fate had other plans. Near the center of the stage, a tall man with long wavy hair and a leather jacket adjusted his guitar strap. The crowd erupted in cheers. He was Adrien Knight, one of the most famous guitarists in the world, a man whose fingers could make a guitar weep or roar, whose albums sold millions, whose arrogance was as legendary as his talent. Adrien thrived on attention and had little patience for anyone he deemed unworthy of it. As the applause faded, Adrien began to speak into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a grin that was half charm, half mischief, "I've played for kings, queens, and presidents. But tonight, I think I should play for someone who claims to be a big deal in another field. Someone who probably thinks they can do anything." The crowd laughed lightly, unsure where he was going. Adrien's eyes scanned the front row until they landed on Sundar. "Yes, you, Mr. Google." The guitarist's voice carried a teasing bite. "Why don't you join me on stage? Maybe show us how tech geniuses handle real instruments." There was a murmur of surprise. A few people chuckled. Sundar felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. He gave a polite smile, shaking his head gently, signaling that he was just here to watch. But Adrien wasn't about to let him off that easily. "Come on," he pressed. "You must have some skill. Or do you only know how to play with search algorithms?" The words dripped with mockery. The room's energy shifted. It was playful for some, but to others, it felt uncomfortable, as though Adrien was cornering someone who clearly didn't want the spotlight. Sundar stood slowly. Not because he was angry, but because he didn't want the mood to sour. He walked toward the stage with calm, measured steps. The applause was polite but laced with curiosity. "Do you play guitar, Mr. Pichai?" Adrien asked, smirking as he handed Sundar an extra instrument. Sundar looked at the guitar for a long moment before answering. "I used to," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the large hall. Adrien laughed. "Oh, perfect. Used to. This will be fun." He strummed his own guitar loudly, filling the room with a sharp, confident melody. Let's see if the tech giant can keep up with the music giant. As Adrien began playing a fast, intricate riff, Sundar positioned his fingers on the fretboard. It had been years since he last touched a guitar, back in his college days in India, before life had taken him down a very different path. But music was a language he had once spoken fluently, and deep in his chest, something old and familiar began to stir. The crowd leaned forward, sensing a moment they hadn't expected. Adrien glanced at Sundar with a smug look, clearly expecting him to fumble. The guitarist's notes danced wildly, his hands a blur. Sundar listened carefully, his eyes focused on the movement of Adrien's fingers, almost as if he were decoding a complex problem. Then Sundar played a single note. Clean, deep, and resonant. It cut through the hall like a bell, making several heads turn. He followed it with another and another, stringing them together in a slow, haunting melody that contrasted sharply with Adrien's aggressive style. The crowd grew quiet. Adrien frowned slightly, increasing his speed to try to overpower Sundar's sound. But Sundar didn't rush. His fingers moved with a deliberate grace, each note placed with care, telling a story without words. For the first time that night, Adrien's expression shifted from arrogance to mild uncertainty. Sundar wasn't competing with him. He was creating something completely different. Something emotional, something that reached people in a way speed and skill couldn't. A woman in the second row wiped a tear from her cheek. The melody seemed to carry weight as if it came from a place of deep memory and longing. And then, just as the music was building towards something powerful, Sundar stopped. He set the guitar down gently, nodded politely to Adrien, and began walking off the stage. The room erupted into whispers. Adrien stood frozen, unsure what had just happened, but before Sundar could reach the curtains, Adrien's voice called after. Wait, you can't just walk away after that. What was that piece? Where did you learn to play like that? Sundar paused, his back still to the crowd. It's a song my father used to hum when I was a child, he said quietly. It's not written anywhere, only in my memory. The silence that followed was heavy. Adrien opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a loud voice came from the balcony. Play it again. Others began to echo the call, and then, from somewhere deep in the audience, a man shouted something that made Sundar freeze in. Plays? That song? It's the last thing my brother played before he disappeared. The air in the auditorium seemed to thicken. Sundar slowly turned, scanning the crowd for the voice. The man who had spoken was standing now, his face pale, his hands trembling. Adrien looked from the man to Sundar, utterly confused. The audience waited, caught between awe and a strange sense of dread, as Sundar's eyes locked with the stranger's. And in that moment, Sundar knew this night was no longer just about music. Asterisk the echo that would not fathom the moment, the man shouted from the balcony. The hall changed shape. The laughter, the gentle buzz of admiration, the humble energy of a charity night, all of it folded into a tight knot of silence. People who had been smiling now stared at one another in confusion. Some craned their necks to see the man standing. Under the balcony light, as if the beam had chosen him on purpose, like the world was a stage and the spotlight was done pretending to be subtle. Sundar felt a light tremor inside his chest, the same tremor a person feels when an old door opens by itself in a quiet house. He did not know the man, but the man's eyes knew something, and it felt personal. It felt like a finger reaching. Through time to tap his shoulder, the man spoke again, but softer this time, as if he too was scared of what his words might unlock. That melody, he said, and his voice shook. My brother used to play it in the courtyard every weekend. He vanished 6 years ago. I never heard it again after that night. He swallowed, and the hall swallowed with him. Until now. Adrien, still holding his guitar in that practiced, arrogant way, let the neck of the instrument drop an inch. He looked at Sundar with narrowed eyes that were not smug now, but uncertain. Something cracked in him, like glass loosening in an old window. What is this? He muttered under his breath, and the microphone caught it and made his private question. Public. Sundar moved closer to the front of the stage and rested a hand on the edge, steadying himself. He had not planned to play again. He had not planned to speak again either. But plans are things we invent to protect us from life, and life rarely listens. What is your brother's name? He asked, and it was not an empty question. It was a thread. It was a line he hoped to follow. The man looked down at his hands as if the name were written there, and then he lifted his face and said, Arun. The name fell like a pebble in a lake. It made ripples. It moved across Sundar's chin. He tasted dust and sun for a second and remembered a small room, a ceiling fan that squeaked during the hottest days, a shared hostel corridor that smelled of soap and warm metal, and a boy who carried a guitar like it was a second spine. Sundar blinked. No, it could not be. There were many Aruns in the world. Names repeat. Histories don't always collide. But the melody, this specific and quiet shape of notes, where had it been hiding all these years inside him, inside memory, and work and life? Arun, he repeated, as if saying it out loud would confirm whether the universe was only joking with him. What was his last name? Singh, the man replied. Arun Singh. Adrien shot a sideways glance at Sundar. The guitarist's bravado retreated further, like the tide surrendering an arrogant shore. The audience stirred, the way an audience stirs when it realizes it is not watching a show anymore. It is watching life unfold with edges and risk and consequences. 1. Woman in a silver dress leaned forward and squeezed the hand of the man beside her. A young boy in the fourth row, who had been bored and playing with his program booklet, looked up with wide eyes and caught the seriousness of this moment as if it were a ball thrown into his lap. I knew an Arun Singh, Sundar said, and a whisper moved over the crowd like a breeze. In college. He had a guitar with a small sticker of a paper kite near the sound hole. He used to hum a tune like the one I played tonight when we were studying at night. He said the tune came to him when he couldn't sleep. The man on the balcony put a hand over his mouth. His shoulders trembled. That image of the paper kite was not a detail a stranger would conjure by chance. He started down the steps in a hurry, whispering, "Excuse me, sorry, please." Person he squeezed past, his face wet and unashamed. Security hesitated, looked to the stage manager, and then allowed him through. It was about something human and possibly miraculous. And took a step back and let his hand hang loose by his side. "So this is real," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is not some trick to upstage me." His jaw clenched, and pride had a brief fight with humility in the muscles of his face. He took a breath and turned his microphone off, as if the night had stopped being a performance for him too. When the man reached the edge of the stage, Sundar stepped forward and offered his hand. "I'm Sundar," he said. And the man said, "Avinash." "I'm Avinash Singh." And they shook hands like people do when they are testing if the world around them is stable enough to hold what is about to come next. Avinash looked up, eyes searching, desperate yet warm. "You really knew him?" "I did," Sundar said. "We spent many long nights in the common room. Sometimes he would talk about his little brother, who liked to climb mango trees and who kept losing kites on windy days. I think he loved to lose them, actually. He liked watching them become small dots in the sky and float into places he could. Not imagined yet." Sundar's voice softened. He would laugh when he said your name. Avinash blinked quickly, like someone trying to adjust to light after years of dark. "Did he ever tell you where he learned that melody? That exact one?" Sundar looked down at the guitar, and then at the vast hall, at the curved ceiling, at the velvet, at the people who were hungry for answers the way a cliff is hungry for the sea. "He didn't tell me," Sundar said, "but I think I know. Because my father used to hum the same melody when I was a boy, and I do not believe in accidents like this." The audience held its breath. The charity founder, an elderly woman in a sari, stepped into the wing and watched with her hands pressed together, not in prayer exactly, but in quiet attention. The stage crew went still. Even the lights hummed a softer hum, as if electricity. "Could be respectful, please," Avinash said, and his voice lifted from a whisper to a plea that still carried dignity. "Please play it again. Every note, slowly. Maybe there's something in the way you play it that can help me remember. Maybe there's a clue. I know it sounds foolish, but I can't shake this feeling that the last night I saw him is hidden inside that tune." Sundar nodded. The request was not foolish. He picked up the guitar again. When he wrapped his fingers around its neck, the wood felt warmer than before, like a living thing. Adrien stepped to the side of the stage, then surprised everyone, including himself, by kneeling and adjusting one of the stage monitors for Sundar. A simple, silent act that had nothing to do with spotlight and everything to do with respect. Humility entered the room like a quiet guest who had been waiting outside for a chance to slip in without applause. The first note rang out and slid across the hall. It was round and clean and full of a kind of sadness that did not ask for pity. Sundar followed it with the next. He went slowly, the way you walk across a floor in a room where a child is sleeping. The melody unfolded like a memory that has been kept in a box and is finally being let out to breathe. Avinash closed his eyes. At certain intervals, his lips moved, counting, whispering, lining up the present with the past. As Sundar approached the middle phrase, something in Avinash loosened. He exhaled. Yes, he murmured. This part. He always paused here. He would look up at the stars, even if there was a roof. He would do that, Look up like he could see more than the rest of us. Several people in the audience nodded without realizing it. A connection had been made not only between two men on a stage, but among strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder. The melody, when shared, wove them together with a thin, strong thread. And then, when the song arrived at the final passage, Sundar felt the pull of an instinct he could not explain. This final passage was always soft in his father's humming. It was a landing, a gentle step onto solid ground. But the echo of Arun's version in his memory was different. It carried a hesitation and then a broken turn, like a road that doesn't go where you think it will. Sundar let that instinct guide his fingers. He changed the last three notes, allowing the third one to fall a half step lower. A little crooked, a little unresolved. Avinash's eyes flew open. He reached out as if to grab the note in midair before it faded. The sound cut through him the way sunrise cuts fog. That, he said, trembling, that is how he played it the last night. Not like before. He said he changed the ending because the ending of his day was different. I asked him what that meant, and he laughed. He said, do not worry, Avi. You'll understand later. I never did. Adrien stood up slowly. No swagger now, only wonder. And then he disappeared. He said, unable to stop himself, the words heavy. He looked at the crowd because he could not bear to look at Avinash. How did he disappear? He left for a gig, Avinash said. A private event? Someone sent him an invitation with a promise of a recording session. He told me it was a chance, a real one. He took his guitar with the paper kite sticker and a small tape recorder he always carried in his bag. He never came back. He swallowed hard. The police found nothing. No ticket records, no camera footage we could access, no name that matched. The message he received. Just an empty seat on the last bus he took that night. Sundar felt that tremor again. A bus, an empty seat, a changed ending. Do you still have the tape recorder? He asked gently. No, Avinash said, then paused. But I have the last cassette he gave me. It's old and sounds like rain and rust. He recorded fragments on it. I played it until the tape got thin, and the notes sounded like ghosts in water. Sometimes I think I hear voices underneath, but maybe that's only my pain trying to speak. Adrien cleared his throat, then did something that surprised him again. He stepped to the center mic and turned it back on, but he did not aim to take control. He aimed to offer something. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, and his voice did not perform now. It simply told the truth. This night started as a show, but life came on stage. If you'll stay with us a little longer, I want to help. I want to be useful, not famous. He turned to Avinash and Sundar. Play it again, he said softly, and let me find the harmony below it. Maybe we can discover a pattern your ears know, but your minds can't place yet. The audience did not clap. Clapping felt too blunt for a moment like this. They breathed. They leaned in. They trusted. Sundar nodded, and Avinash closed his eyes again, and Adrien found a position a bit behind them. His head bowed the way musicians bow in a cathedral, even if they don't know the prayers. Sundar began, and Adrien joined with a hushed counter-melody, not trying to shine, only trying to listen with his hands. They moved through the phrases as patients and as searchers. And then Adrien did what good musicians do when they serve something. Bigger than themselves. He left space. He let silence speak in between. In that silence, the small sounds of the hall reappeared. The distant rattle of a door. A soft cough. The shifting of shoes on carpet. And then a sound that did not belong. To the hall it all got from backstage, buried beneath the hum of equipment. A thin metallic click echoed out. Faint, but not imaginary. It had the delicate insistence of a grandfather clocked down a long corridor. Click, click, pause, click. Sundar stopped playing mid-phrase. Adrien lifted his fingers and let the last string ring. Avinash's eyes snapped open. For a second they all remained perfectly still. The way you stay still when you think you hear your name whispered in a crowd. Did you hear that? Adrien asked. The stage manager stepped forward from the wings, whispering into his headset. Hold, he said, to someone on the other end. He looked at the musicians, at the audience, and then the sound came again. Click, click, pause, click, followed by the faintest texture of tape. The soft drag of ribbon over a worn wheel. That's a cassette deck, Avinash whispered. You know that sound. No one moved. The stage manager gestured carefully toward the far left wing, where a storage door stood ajar. It was the kind of door no one notices because it is painted the same color as the wall. A narrow strip of light bled from the crack in the frame. The click came once more, followed by the breathless hush of an old machine spinning for the first time in years. Sundar felt the melody inside him stir and point, like a compass needle shaking and then settling toward north. Stay here. The head of security set into his sleeve, but he did not bark the order. He tempered it with respect, as if the room itself needed soft voices. Yet before anyone could stop him, a lean figure near the side curtain, one of the junior stagehands, broke from his position and hurried toward the door with strange urgency. His stride had the odd stiffness of someone who is trying to look casual while carrying a secret. The head of security frowned and followed him. Wait, Sundar said, and he started walking, the guitar still in his hand because letting it go felt dangerous, like dropping a key mid-corridor. Adrien and Avinash followed. The audience, bound by invisible thread, rose slightly in their seats. Not fully standing, not fully sitting, tethered to the movement as if it were pulling them forward. 2. The storage door creaked open wider, and the smell that came out was old and sweet with dust. Backstage, storage rooms have their own weather. Forgotten posters, coils of cables, flight cases with stickers from tours that meant something to someone. Once, in the center of the floor, on a metal utility cart, sat a small gray cassette recorder with a cracked plastic lid. Its spools turning with the slow confidence of a machine that refuses to die. A cable ran from it to a tiny speaker. A strip of tape curled out like a lock of hair. And from that speaker, just above the hush of tape running against heads, came the melody. The same melody, but not quite. The first notes were exact. A mirror of what Sundar had played, down to the tenderness of the second tone. Then the third. Note leaned off-center, almost shy. And the fifth note carried a faint ghost voice under it, like someone speaking from another room. The tape hissed like rain on dry land. Then the recording wavered, and the ending. Yes. The ending fell a half step low. Then twisted upward, as if it wanted to live after all. Of Ines pressed a hand flat against the cart, steadying himself. That's him, he said hoarse. That is Arun's touch. I would know it even if I were asleep. The junior stage hand, young, sharp-boned, with a nervous energy that now looked almost like fear, stood by the cart, avoiding everyone's eyes. The head of security put a hand near his shoulder without touching him. Son, he said gently. Where did you get this? The stagehand swallowed. His name badge read, Kiran. His gaze flicked to Sundar, then to Avinash, then to Adrien's guitar, then back to the turning spools. I found it, he said, but the word found. Wore a costume. It tried to look casual and failed. It was in one of the old flight cases. I was cleaning earlier. I thought it was junk. I only plugged it in because I was bored. Adrien took a small step closer and his voice softened. The way a father's voice softens when he knows a child is also a witness. Kiran, he said, you didn't do anything wrong by turning it on. But the way you ran, it felt like you were guarding something. Not just a tape. Karan's jaw worked. He looked 20 and also 40 at the same time. The age of someone who has been carrying more than his own weight. I don't want trouble, he said. And this time the words were naked and honest. I've been here 3 months, sir. I need this job. The head of security nodded. You're not in trouble, he said. We are trying to understand. That's all. He reached out and, still not touching Kiran, gestured to the machine. May we listen from the beginning? Kiran. hesitated, and then reached toward the cassette deck. His hand hovered over the stop button, then the rewind. His fingers shook. He pressed stop, then rewind, and the tape spun backward, clicking softly, the sound of time moving upstream. He pressed play. A thin click. A breath. A scrape that might have been a chair. Then Arun's voice, young and clear, came through the speaker with a warmth that felt like he had just walked into the room and would walk out again when he had finished his thought. "Okay," he said, a smile audible in the syllables. "Test one. If anyone ever hears this, it means I was brave. Enough to share it, or maybe it means I didn't have a choice." Avinash made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He covered his mouth with his fist and listened as if the ceiling would collapse if he moved. This melody, Arun continued, was taught to me by a man in a small cafe near the bus depot. He said he heard it from a boy who heard it from his father, who heard it from someone who crossed an ocean. He told me to change the ending when my day changed. So I did. I'm on my way to meet people who say they can help me record. They asked me to bring the guitar and the tape. If I don't, come back. Well, music has its own way of finding the people it needs. The recording paused, then the guitar began, hesitant but pure. Sundar closed his eyes. It was not a performance. It was a confession. Halfway through, Arun's voice returned, softer, as if he had leaned closer to the microphone without meaning to. "Avi, if you ever hear this, don't be angry with me," he whispered. "I think this is it. Either the start or the end. I can't tell." The tape clicked and whirred, then suddenly pitched down. Someone had recorded over the next seconds with static and low murmurs. It sounded like a room full of people breathing, a door opening, a chair leg dragging across cement. Then a voice that was not Arun's, low and precise, spoke one word. "Ready." The tape cut out. No one in the small room spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the tape machine's spinning parts winding to a stop, the soft satisfaction of a job finished, even if it was only the job of playing back ghosts. Adrian exhaled slowly. It felt like the first breath anyone had taken. "Where did that flight case come from?" Sundar asked quietly. He was looking at Kiran, but he was also looking at the pattern behind Kiran. The shape that was starting to emerge from the fog. Who used it? Which artist? Kiran licked his lip. He pointed to a stack of cases by the back wall. Each was stamped with faded tour schedules and white stencils that had chipped over time. He pointed to one that had a worn sticker half peeled away, leaving only the shape of a word. Under the sticky residue, you could still read it. Paper, and then the rest of the letters had been torn. But if you knew what you were looking at, you could see it anyway. Kiked out AVINSA, single quotes, S knees wobbled. And Sundar and Adrien reached for him at the same time, steadying him without fuss. Avinash stared at the case and shook his head slowly. "He put that sticker on everything he loved," he said. "I thought I would never see it again." The head of security stepped forward and knelt beside the case. He flicked the locks open with a quick practice motion and lifted the lid. Inside were coiled cables, a cracked metronome, a harmonica in a tin box, and, wrapped in cloth that had once been white, the shape of a guitar. His hands hovered above it and then paused. He looked up at Sundar and Avinash, a question in his eyes. "Are you ready for what we may find?" Sundar nodded, and Avinash whispered, "Please." The cloth peeled back like a curtain, and there it was. A guitar with a mellow, worn finish. The edges darkened by years of palms and sweat, and near the sound hole, a small sticker of a paper kite, faded but unmistakable. A soft sound moved through the little crowd. The head of security lifted the instrument gently. Avinash reached out, then pulled his hand back, then reached again and let his fingers brush the wood like one touches a face in a dream. "It's his," he said. "It's him." Adrien looked at the guitar with a reverence that had nothing to do with the price of an instrument. He turned to Kiran. "How long has this been here?" Kiran's throat bobbed. "I don't know," he said. Since before I started. I think since the last renovation. The label on the case's tag says it was checked in 8 years ago and never checked out. No one noticed because it got stacked in the back behind the broken risers. I only moved it today because we needed space for the gala. And you heard the tape now because we played the melody, Sundar murmured. The idea not logical in the way science is logical, but logical in the way life sometimes is. You heard it because you were ready to hear it? Kiran nodded, and then, as if he had been holding something in his pocket that burned, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, flat item wrapped in black gaffer tape. He glanced at the head of security, then at Sundar, then at Avinash. Shame and fear and duty wrestled across his face, and duty won. There was also this, he said, taped to the underside of the cassette deck. I didn't know if I should. I didn't want to lose my job. The head of security took the object gently and unwrapped it, layer by cautious layer. Inside the tape was a narrow metal key with teeth cut and a deliberate pattern and a small tag attached, a rectangle of torn paper with 4 numbers. Written in pencil, 317B. The handwriting was clean, a student's hand, a musician's. Hand? Someone who drew their letters as if they might someday need to turn them into notes. A locker, Adrien said. Or a storage room or a safety deposit box, Avinash swallowed. He wouldn't have had a safety deposit box. He said, we couldn't afford that then. But a locker, yes. He used to rent practice rooms. And the letter basement. He hated basements, but he practiced in them because they were cheap. The head of security looked at the stage manager. Do we have old maps of the building? The stage manager nodded slowly. We do, he said. In the archives? And for the first time since the tape started, a small current of purposeful energy, not frantic but focused, ran through the group. They could do something. They could move. Respect and kindness lifted their elbows. Resilience straightened their backs. We're not leaving this to chance, Adrien said. And there was a quiet authority in his voice now, the kind that comes from regret turning into intention. We will search this building tonight. I will cancel the rest of my set, and I will tell the audience the truth. They deserve it, and so does he. He looked at Sundar, held his gaze, and said what he had been learning since the first clear. Note cut through his pride. I am sorry for mocking you. I was playing for the wrong reasons. Let me help for the right ones. Sundar nodded once. Acceptance without ceremony. Thank you, he said. We do this together. They emerged from the storage room to a hall that was still full, not with noise, but with devotion. Adrien walked to the microphone and told them exactly what had happened. No drama added. No egos saved, just the clean arcs of truth, he said. They would pause the show to search for answers that might be hidden in the walls of the very place that had held their music. He asked anyone who needed to leave to do so gently, and anyone who wished to stay respectfully and with care. The audience, almost as one body, stayed. Backstage, the stage manager rolled out an old metal cabinet full of building maps. The head of security laid them on a long table and slid his finger along the lines like a river pilot reading a delta. Here, he said, tapping a faded blueprint edge. Sublevel, B, storage row 3, unit 17. That matches our numbers. 317B. Avinash's breath hitched. It can't be that simple, he whispered. Simple is not the same as easy, Sundar replied. But sometimes, yes, the world leaves a door slightly open. They took the key. The head of security led, then Kiran, then Avinash, then Sundar, then Adrien. A handful of others followed at a respectful distance. They moved down a narrow service stairwell that smelled of damp and old paint. The lights flickered once and then steadied. The sound of the gala faded behind them until all they heard was the echo of their shoes and the soft metallic jangle of the key against the tag. Sublevel B was low and cool. The ceiling was the kind that forces tall men to bow, which has a way of making everyone polite. Row 3 was a corridor of old doors. each with a small square plate for numbers and a lock beneath it. They walked past 314, 315, 316. The air got colder. Or perhaps the air inside them got colder. They stopped in front of 317. The plate was tarnished. Someone had once tried to polish it with vigor and then given up. The lock was the kind that should have been replaced years ago, but had not been, because things left alone become part of the building and everyone forgets to question them. The head of security turned to Avinash. Would you like to do it? He asked. Avinash looked at the key in his hand, the way one looks at a photograph of a person. They have not forgiven and have never stopped loving. He nodded, and his fingers worked with a focus that moved him beyond. Shaking, the key slid into the lock. It resisted, then yielded. The sound it made was small but final. The door eased open with a sigh, and a draft slipped out, carrying the scent of wood, old paper, and the memory of cigarette smoke inside. The room was narrow and deep. A single low bulb flickered to life after a few long seconds, like the eye of a very tired animal. Shelves lined the walls. Cases, boxes, folded cloths, and one small crate rested on the floor with a label that read, Misc, Audio, Hold. Another flight case stood against the far wall. This one, too, had the ghost of a sticker, not a kite this time, but the curved outline of a crescent moon. Don't touch anything yet, the head of security said gently, his hand raised. He took his phone out and began quietly filming, documenting. Not for spectacle, but for accountability. We'll move slowly. Avinash reached toward the crate labeled Misc, Audio, and stopped himself. Sundar, noticing, stepped in and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of cassettes, each in a plastic sleeve, each with neat small handwriting on a white paper spine. The top one said, New Ending, for AE. The second said, Cafe Man. The third said, Take 4, if brave. Adrien let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The titles were small windows. Each felt like a heartbeat pressed into plastic. This belongs to you, Sundar said to Avinash, his voice firm but kind. But let's be careful. We should play them somewhere safe. Document them. There may be clues. Karen crouched near the other flight case, the one with the crescent moon ghost. Should I open this? He asked, looking up for permission that would also feel like forgiveness. The head of security nodded, slowly. The latches popped. Kira lifted the lid and froze. It was not a guitar inside, not an instrument at all. It was a neat arrangement of envelopes sealed with tape, a rolled cloth bundle that looked like it might hold tools, a small black notebook, and a rectangular plastic badge with a broken clip. Printed on the badge, above a barcode and a serial number, was a name, first name, last name, and beneath it, the logo of a music production company that had gone bankrupt 4 years ago amid rumors and lawsuits and a kind of silence that is louder than any denial. Avinash stared at the name on the badge and whispered. He told me about them. He wanted it to be true. He said they were finally listening. Adrien reached for the notebook with a slow hand. He opened it delicately. Inside, on the first page, was a sketch of a bus route, a list of 3 phone numbers with the words, "Do not call from home," and a single line that made the hair lift on everyone's arms. If the ending changes again, leave the door open. The bulb flickered. A faint sound drifted from the far corner, so faint that at first it could have been the building settling. It grew a gentle, irregular tapping, like a ring against a metal pipe. Everyone turned toward the sound as one. The birds turned together in the sky. Is someone there? The head of security asked, voice low but clear. The tapping stopped, then resumed slower now, then faster, like a code trying to remember itself. Avinash stepped forward, and the head of security lightly touched his arm, a reminder to move carefully. Sundar shifted the guitar in his hands, not as a weapon, but as if the instrument could be a bridge. Adrian's eyes adjusted to the dim, and found the shape of a small access panel near the floor. Half hidden behind a rolled carpet, the tapping came again from behind that panel, deliberate, close dot, and then, from beyond the thin metal, a voice hoarse. Older, but carrying a familiar warmth that had lived for years in Avinish's memory, spoke a single word that made the room tilt and the blood in their bodies surge toward their hearts. Avi? Asterisk, the voice behind the penultimate sound of that single word. Avi was not just a voice breaking through a thin panel. It was years collapsing into seconds, memories tearing through the thick walls of time, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. Avinash froze in place, his body leaning forward but rooted to the ground, as though the air between him and that voice was sacred and could not be crossed without care. His eyes widened, not with disbelief, but with the heavy weight of recognition. For a moment, no one moved. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, every sound amplified. The faint buzz of the flickering bulb, the soft hiss of someone's breath catching, the distant hum of the building above. Even the dust seemed to hang still in the air, suspended in the same disbelief that gripped everyone present. Arun? Avinash's voice cracked like old wood bending under pressure. He didn't shout. He couldn't. His words were gentle, as though afraid the wrong tone might cause the moment to dissolve. A pause, then the voice again, trembling but certain. Avi, it's me. The world inside that basement seemed to tilt. Adrian's fingers clenched on the notebook he still held, his knuckles whitening, as if holding onto the object might anchor him against what was unfolding. Sundar's chest tightened. He could see Avinash struggling to contain the flood of emotion, and his own breath grew heavy with empathy. Kiran stepped back, his young face pale, not out of fear, but out of the sheer strangeness of witnessing something. That shouldn't be possible. The head of security was the first to move with purpose. He approached the small panel in the wall. Dropping to one knee, the panel was barely 2 feet high and bolted shut at the corners. It looked like an old maintenance hatch, one of those forgotten structures in a building that no one remembers until they're needed. Sir, he said carefully to Sundar and Avinash, I'm going to open it. But we don't know what condition. He's in. Be ready for anything. Avinash nodded quickly, his hands trembling in anticipation, his eyes never leaving that panel. Sundar stepped closer, setting the guitar gently against a nearby shelf, his mind racing through questions that were already stacking up faster than they could be answered. The head of security pulled a multi-tool from his belt and began loosening the bolts. Each turn of the tool scraped against metal, a harsh sound in the tense silence. The flickering bulb threw shifting shadows across everyone's faces, making the moment feel even more unreal. Adrien crouched beside Sundar, his voice low. If that really is him, if this is the Arun we've been talking about, how has he been here? For years. Sundar didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the bolts, watching them fall to the ground one by one. I don't know, he said finally, but we're about to find out. The last bolt clinked to the floor. The head of security pulled at the small handle, and the panel creaked open, releasing a rush of cool, stale air. For a heartbeat, there was only darkness inside. Then, as eyes adjusted, a shape began to form. A man crouched in the narrow space. Beyond, his clothes worn and frayed, his hair long and streaked with gray. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were alive. Arun Singh blinked at the sudden light, shielding his face with one hand. Then his gaze found Avinash, and a smile, small, shaky, but real, appeared. You came, he whispered, as if those words were the only truth that mattered. Avins dropped to his knees, leaning close to the opening. I've been looking for you for 6 years, he said, his voice breaking. I thought you were gone, I thought. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Asterisk. Arun reached a trembling hand through the opening. Avinash took it in both of his, gripping tightly, afraid that if he let go even for a second, the years would close in again and take his brother away. Adrien swallowed hard, his voice low but full of urgency. We need to get him out of there, now. The head of security shone a flashlight into the crawl space. It extended back farther than any of them expected, a narrow passage lined with old pipes and insulation. It's a maintenance tunnel, he said, his tone somewhere between astonishment and unease. These haven't been used in decades. But why was he in here? How did he survive? Water, Arun said weakly, hearing the question. There's a pipe leak sometimes, and food, not much, but enough. Someone left it for me. That last sentence sent a chill through the room. Sundar's mind seized on it. Instantly. Someone left it for you. Ooh, Arun shook his head slowly. Don't know. Never saw them clearly. They didn't want me to leave, said it wasn't safe. His voice faltered, the weight of exhaustion pulling at each. Word.adren glanced at Sundar, his eyes narrowing. This is bigger than we thought. With care, they helped Arun crawl forward until he could step out into the storage room. His legs trembled as they straightened for the first time in who knows how long. Avinash supported him, tears streaming, freely now, not caring who saw. Sundar watched, feeling a quiet ache in his chest. The brothers clung to each other, years of lost moments folding into that single embrace. But beneath the reunion, a shadow lingered. Sundar could feel it. The unanswered questions, the strange fragments of the tape, the deliberate hiding of this man for years in a forgotten part of the building. And then there was that final clue in the notebook. If the ending changes again, leave the door open. What ending? What door? And more importantly, who had wanted Arun to stay hidden? And why were they so afraid of him leaving? Before Sundar could speak, the head of security, who had stepped back toward the open panel, stiffened. We're not alone, he said, quietly. From deep within the tunnel, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of footsteps retreating into the dark. Asterisk the shadow in the tunnel. Footsteps were soft, but distinct, fading deeper into the tunnel, their rhythm unhurried yet purposeful, as if the person knew exactly how far away they needed to be before anyone could catch them. The sound echoed strangely against the metal pipes, bending and warping as it traveled, until it was impossible to tell whether the source was near or vanishing into some unseen distance. The entire group froze, every instinct pulled taut, like a string ready to snap. The head of security was the first to break the stillness. He turned to his team with a sharp, controlled gesture. 2 with me. We go in. The rest stay here and keep him safe. His voice was low but firm, and it carried the weight of someone who understood the difference between curiosity and danger. No, Avinash said immediately, his grip tightening on Arun's arm as if he feared his brother could be pulled back into the dark. We can't split up. If that person knows the tunnels, they'll lose you in seconds. We won't lose them, the head of security replied, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. But we have to know who else is down there. Sundar stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. I'll go with you. Adrien turned sharply toward him. Are you out of your mind? We just got him back. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment that melody led to him, Sundar said quietly. And if that person is connected to Arun's disappearance, we need someone who can think beyond force. We don't know if they're armed, but we do know they've been careful enough to hide him all this time. That means they're not just running. They're protecting something. Or hiding from something bigger. There was a brief silence. The head of security studied Sundar's face, weighing the risk. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine, but you stay behind me. Adrien clenched his jaw but didn't argue further. Instead, he took off his jacket and draped it over Arun's shoulders. Stay warm. I'll stay with him, Adrien said to Avinash, his voice low. And if anything happens to you in there, I swear, nothing will happen, Sundar interrupted. Gently, though inside he knew he couldn't make that promise. The head of security pulled a flashlight from his belt, its beam slicing through the dust-filled air as he crouched and stepped into the narrow hatch. Sundar followed, the cold metal of the tunnel floor pressing through the soles of his shoes. Another guard brought up the rear, his hand hovering near the small holster on his hip. The tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for them to move without brushing against the damp concrete walls. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of rust and mildew. Sundar's mind kept circling the same question. Who would go to such lengths to keep someone hidden here? The footsteps ahead had stopped, replaced by an almost deliberate silence, as if the person was listening to them approach. The head of security slowed his pace, motioning for quiet. Sundar's ears strained in the dark, and that was when he heard it, a faint metallic sound, like a latch being closed or a lock being turned somewhere deeper in the passage. They pressed forward until the tunnel opened into a small chamber, its low ceiling dripping with condensation. An old service door stood at the far end, heavy and dented, with a rusted padlock hanging loosely from its latch. The lock was still swaying as if it had just been touched. The head of security stepped forward quickly, gripping the lock. It wasn't actually locked. The shackle was open, only hooked into place to give the illusion of security. He pushed the door open, revealing another stretch of tunnel beyond, this one sloping downward and disappearing into blackness. They went this way, the head of security muttered, his voice tight. Sundar crouched near the doorway, shining his flashlight over the ground. Faint scuff marks streaked the dust, too precise to be random. Whoever it was had been here many times before. They know these tunnels, Sundar said. They've been using them regularly. To get in and out unseen, the guard behind them added. And if they've been bringing food and water, this is the route they used. The head of securities. Radio crackled softly. Status. A voice asked from above. We're in the South Service tunnels, he replied quietly. Suspect is ahead, moving deeper. They continued, the slope growing steeper, the air colder. Sundar could feel the dampness seeping into his clothes. The silence was oppressive now, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the overhead. Pipes. Then, abruptly, the tunnel opened into a larger underground space, a maintenance hub, with old machinery pushed against the walls and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room sat a wooden chair, and on it, a small canvas bag. The head of security approached first, scanning the area before nodding for Sundar to join him. Sundar stepped closer, his eyes drawn to the bag. It wasn't old and forgotten like everything else down here. It was recent. The canvas was clean, the stitching intact. He opened it carefully. Inside were 2 unopened bottles of water, several energy bars, a folded wool blanket, and a small plastic container filled with neatly cut pieces of fruit. So they weren't lying, Sundar said softly. Someone's been taking care of him. And they were here minutes ago, the head of security replied grimly. He looked toward another tunnel entrance leading out of the hub. They could be anywhere now. Before they could move, a sound echoed faintly from that dark passage, not footsteps this time, but a voice, low, urgent, speaking words that Sundar couldn't fully catch. But one phrase came through clearly, bouncing off the tunnel walls like a warning. They found him? The voice faded, followed by the quick shuffle of retreating feet. The head of security swore under his breath and turned to Sundar. We have to make a choice. Keep chasing them, or go back and get everyone out of here before we're boxed in. Sundar looked at the bag, then back toward the sound of the voice. There was no doubt in his mind now. This wasn't random. Whoever had been down here had been guarding Arun for years. The question was whether they had been protecting him from the outside world, or protecting the outside world from him. Somewhere in the depths of that thought, Sundar felt a chill crawl down his spine. The melody, the cassette, the changed ending. All of it was connected to something much larger than he had imagined. He turned to the head of security, his decision made. We go back. We protect Arun first. If they wanted him hidden for this, long. Finding him changes everything. They began the climb back toward the storage room, the air growing warmer as they neared the hatch. Sundar could already see the glow of the flashlight beams spilling from the opening. Adrien was there, leaning forward, watching for them, relief washing over his face as soon as he saw them return. But that relief was short-lived, because behind Adrien, in the shadow of the storage shelves, a new figure had appeared. A tall, Man in a dark coat standing perfectly still, watching Arun with an expression that was impossible to read. And when Sundar stepped fully into the room, the man finally spoke, his voice deep and controlled. You shouldn't have opened that door. The man in the dark coat, man's words hung in the air like a final note that refused to fade. You shouldn't have opened that door. It was not shouted, nor was it whispered, yet the tone carved through the room with the precision of a scalpel. Everyone turned toward him at once. The light from the single bulb caught only part of his face, the edge of a sharp jaw, a faint scar tracing from his temple to the corner of his cheek. His eyes, shadowed but steady, stayed fixed on Arun. As if no one else in the room mattered, a Draen instinctively stepped between the stranger and Arun. His body tensed, his stance wider now. Who are you? He demanded, his voice louder than intended. As though volume could fill the growing uncertainty, the man didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted momentarily to Sundar, measuring him in the same way a chess player studies the board before making a move. Then he looked back at Arun and spoke again, slower this time. You don't understand what you've done. None of you do. The head of security stepped forward, one hand resting near the radio clipped to his shoulder. You're going to explain yourself, he said firmly. Right now. The man's mouth curved into the faintest smile, not one of amusement, but one that hinted at some private knowledge, as if he knew the next several moves in a game no one else realized they were playing. If I tell you, he said, you'll wish you'd left him where he was. Avinish's grip on Arun's shoulder tightened. Left him? You kept him down there like an animal, he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. He's my brother. He's not yours to hide. At that, the man's expression shifted for the first time, not to guilt, but to something like regret. You think I was keeping him prisoner? He said softly. But I was keeping him alive. Silence fell. Over the room. Arun, pale and still exhausted, straightened slightly at the words. Alive? You call that living? 6 years in a hole while the world thought I was dead. The man stepped closer, each movement deliberate, controlled. If you had been out there, he said, his voice low, you would be dead. And not just you. His eyes flickered briefly toward Avinish, then Sundar. People you care about would have been collateral. You don't know how many were looking for you. Sundar's brows drew together. Looking for him? Why? He's a musician. Not the man cut him off with a small shake of his head. He's more than that. He played something he shouldn't have played, and he didn't even know it. Adrien frowned. You mean the melody? The man's gaze moved. To Adrien, assessing, almost surprised that someone had connected the dots. Yes, that melody. Do you know where it comes from? Sundar spoke before Adrien could. My father used to hum it. He said it was old. Older than him, older than his father. I thought it was just a tune passed down. Passed down, the man repeated, almost to himself. Yes, passed down through people who had no idea what it really was. Like carrying a letter for decades without knowing it holds a code. A code? Sundar asked, his voice steady, but his mind quickening. The man nodded slowly. A sequence of notes, ancient, but specific, and when played in full, with the right timing, it matches a cipher, one used to unlock something very valuable. Something certain people have spent their lives searching for. Avinish blinked, shaking his head. You're saying my brother's song is a key? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense to you, the man replied. It only has to make sense to the people willing to kill for it. The head of security took a step closer, his posture sharp. Who are you? Are you one of them? The man's eyes darkened. No, I was the last barrier between him and them. And now, he glanced toward the open hatch, his voice tightening. Now they know you found him. Adrien's voice dropped, almost a whisper. That's why you were in the tunnels. You heard us. The man gave a short nod. I've been down there for weeks. They were getting close. I knew the moment I heard the guitar on stage that everything was about to unravel. The melody traveled farther than you think. A sound came from the hall outside the storage room. Faint, but distinct enough to slice through the conversation. A metallic clink, followed by the slow, deliberate turn of a door handle. The head of security stiffened, signaling for silence. The man in the dark coat moved first. Without asking, he strode to the back wall and began shifting a tall metal shelving unit, revealing another narrow passage behind it. "You need to get him out of here. Now." Avinash looked torn, his voice breaking. "And just trust you?" "You don't have to trust me," the man said, his tone urgent now. "Just trust the fact that whoever's coming through that door isn't here to help." Sundar stepped closer to him. "If you know so much, then tell me, where do we take him?" The man hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered envelope. He pressed it into Sundar's hand. There was an address. "Inside. It's safe for now. But only if you move fast and stay quiet." The sound of the door handle turning came again, this time accompanied by a low voice outside, speaking in a language Sundar didn't recognize. Adrian glanced at the head of security, whose jaw tightened. The man in the coat looked directly at Sundar. "You open the door," he said again, softer this time, almost like a warning meant for only one person. "Now you have to decide if you can close it before it's too late." And before Sundar could respond, the storage room door swung open. 3 figures stepped inside, tall, dressed in plain dark clothing. Their movements synchronized, their faces unreadable. Their eyes scanned the room once, settling on Arun. Man in the coat moved without hesitation, stepping into their path, his hand slipping to something inside his jacket. The tension in the air snapped tight like wire, and Sundar, standing a few steps away with the envelope in his hand, realized in that instant that the night's mystery had shifted into something far more dangerous, a game that would not end. Simply because they had found a Arun dot, it would end only when they understood why the melody had survived for generations, and what unlocking it would truly cost. Asterisk the last note-heavy moment the 3 figures entered. The air in the storage room compressed, as if the oxygen itself had been pulled thinner. Their steps were silent, the kind of silence that comes from training, not chance. They moved like a shadow splitting into 3 bodies, each one assessing the space with quick, calculated glances. None of them spoke. Their eyes, dark and unreadable, locked on Arun in unison. The man in the dark coat shifted, placing himself fully between them and his former hiding place. The movement was subtle, but it carried a quiet finality, the way someone might step onto a bridge knowing it could collapse under their weight. Sundar caught a brief look in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance. Adrien moved closer to Arun and Avinash, his voice low but steady. "Stay behind me." His hands flexed once as though ready to grab whatever he could use as a weapon. The head of security angled himself toward the newcomers, his hand resting near his sidearm but not yet drawing it, not wanting to escalate until he had to. The first of the 3 strangers, a broad-shouldered man with hair cropped short, finally spoke. "We've been looking for him," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "You've made this very difficult." "He's not going anywhere with you," the man in the coat replied, his tone calm but layered with warning. The second stranger, tall, with a narrow face and eyes that seemed to take in every detail at once, tilted his head slightly. "Do you know what he carries?" "Yes," the man in the coat said, simply. "And that's why you're not getting him." Sundar's pulse quickened. The conversation felt like 2 players speaking in code over a chessboard, each move calculated. He stepped forward just enough to speak, his voice clear. "This isn't about music, is it? It's about what the melody hides." The narrow-faced stranger's gaze flicked to Sundar. "You're quick," he said. "Too quick to be standing this close." The third stranger, who had been silent until now, shifted slightly, and in that motion Sundar saw it, a faint glint under the cuff of his jacket, the unmistakable edge of a small, concealed weapon. The head of security saw it too. "This ends now," the head of security said, his voice firm. "You leave, and we pretend you were never here." The broad-shouldered man smiled faintly. "You can't pretend away a song." And then, without warning, the man in the coat moved. It wasn't an attack, not in the traditional sense. Instead, his hand shot into his jacket and pulled out something small, metallic, a device no bigger than a harmonica. With a quick flick, he pressed it to his lips and blew. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible at first, but it carried a strange resonance that cut through the tension like a fine blade. Arun froze, his eyes widening, recognition flaring across his face. Adrian's brow furrowed. That's part of it. That's the missing phrase. Arun nodded slowly, his lips trembling. The last note, he whispered. The strangers reacted. Immediately. The narrow-faced one took a step forward, his composure cracking for the first time. Don't do this, he said sharply. But it was already done. The man in the coat lowered the device and looked directly at Arun. It's yours to finish, he said. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then Arun, still pale and weak from years, in hiding, took a slow breath. His hands, trembling, reached for the guitar Sundar had set aside earlier. Sundar stepped forward and passed it to him without a word.